Hello again, witches, seekers, and friends, and welcome to the Fat Feminist Witch podcast, the show where we do a little ranting, raving, and wand waving. I'm your host, Paige, and together we're going to explore magic and spirituality, social justice, the psychic realm, and most importantly, books! Sorry for the yelling, but I am super excited for today's episode because we are talking about my favorite thing in the whole world. Books! And I know that a lot of you guys love books too. That's why you're here. So specifically, of course, today I am talking about witchy books. And not just the modern ones that we love to read and that I love to review, or the ancient ones that we really love to try to interpret, but also the ones that we write ourselves, our grimoires, journals, and books of shadows. I'll also be touching on the books that I use most in my regular practice, some that influenced me, some that I collect, and some that I am excited to read in the future. So let's start with some of those words I used, grimoire and book of shadows. These words are often used interchangeably because they both mean books, right? But technically and historically, they are rather different, but they both refer to a book containing the secrets and methods of magic. Grimoire is an older term and mainly describes a textbook or a workbook that details exactly how to perform and create rituals, summon demons or angels, and divine the future. The word grimoire wasn't applied specifically to books of magic until the late 1700s, but historical magic books have been dubbed grimoires retroactively, no matter when they came out. Book of Shadows, on the other hand, is a term created by the founder of Wicca, Gerald Gardner, in the late 1940s. Unlike publicly published grimoires that have been in circulation for centuries, even though some were anonymous, the Book of Shadows was to be kept a secret from anyone outside of the coven. The BOS served as the coven's grimoire, definitely, but it also included personal information about the members, writing about the efficacy of spells and rituals, poetry and songs, different deities that they worked with and experiences with them, and specific rules and beliefs of their coven. Originally, there was one book per coven, one big, beautiful book of shadows, right? A great record of all of their practice and all of their work. But of course, this is not so feasible, mostly because everybody wants one. Everyone wants their own big, amazing, beautiful witch book, right? He also said that the Book of Shadows should be burned upon the death of its creator, but the pull of a family book of shadows being passed down is just much too great to ignore. I still know witches who don't show their book to anyone except family. They don't bring it out of the house, and they take great care to fill it up with everything that they do so that their children can carry on whatever traditions they've established. These people are usually practicing Wiccans in a Wiccan tradition, but they're about my age, so it's not like it's something that has died out. So intense, but very, very cool. And this idea is no doubt inspired by the tradition of passing down a family Bible, something that we even did in my family, right? And modern witch media really ran with this idea, and they made books of shadows and family grimoires appears in lots of books and movies, and they were always so extra. Leather bound, they had incredibly weird things glued in, spells in other languages, how to deal with demons. Grimoires and books of shadows in witchy media could be an episode all on its own, I think. So we're going to talk a bit more about creating your own book of shadows or grimoire a little bit later in the episode. And I've got a cool blessing or consecration ritual for beginning a new book just for your magical practice. And it'll be perfect for tomorrow's full moon because tomorrow is Friday the 13th. How cool is that, right? So let's go back a little bit. A lot. Actually, the earliest known written words about performing magic come from ancient Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, and are chiseled into clay tablets in cuneiform, the world's first written language. Isn't that wild? And these are dated back to the 5th and 4th century BCE. That's a couple thousand years ago. I want to make sure you realize that is thousands of years ago. For more reference, The 5th and 4th century, these are the era of the ancient Greeks and eventually, Alexander the Great. So well before the Library of Alexandria housed all of these incredible magical texts, they were being chiseled into clay by ancient Sumerians. How amazing is that? Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, being the innovators of writing and worship and religion that they were, also extensively documented their magical works. Heka was the Egyptian word for magic and was also kind of the name of someone who practiced magic, or the practice of magic. It became the name of their deification of magic. The deity Heka was the deity of magic and medicine, worshipped as a god. When we talk about Egyptian magical texts and sacred books, the one that always comes up is the Book of the Dead. No doubt, because of The Mummy, the film, the one with Brendan Fraser, because he was just a masterpiece of a sexy adventure hero. And straight up, I watched The Mummy twice in the last year, and it is totally awesome. It really holds up. Of course, the book is not quite so much like that. The book is not anything like in those films. Of course, it's an action movie, right? The truth is, there is no one single master copy of the Book of the Dead. This book was a funerary text written on papyrus to help guide a specific spirit into the afterlife. They were personalized. So in addition to spells and incantations, the scrolls featured color images depicting this specific dead person weighing his heart on the scales of Maat against the feather of truth. But before they wrote the spells on the papyrus scrolls, they were carved or painted onto the walls of tombs and on sarcophagi. That's what those hieroglyphics on there are. These are referred to as the pyramid and the coffin texts, for obvious reason. There is an incredibly preserved copy of a Book of the Dead for the Theban scribe Ani. And it was, of course, stolen from Egypt by a British explorer, asshole, and he cut it into many pieces in a way that it wasn't really able to be put back together. So this scroll now exists in, I think, 16 different pieces. It was quite large. There was a lot that went into these Books of the Dead. Luckily, it was given to the British Museum, so everyone can see it now. So this huge scroll contains full color images of Ani weighing his heart. And, Amit, the crocodile creature who devoured the souls of the unworthy, is laying in wait, and it's filled with hymns and prayers and stories about him specifically, spells he would need to cross over, and then his 42 negative confessions of Maat, assuring that he was a good and worthy person. And these are almost like, taking your confession. I have not committed grave sins, I have not stolen from the gods, I have not hurt other people, and there's 42 of them. This, by the way, is going to be its own podcast episode on October 3rd. I will be talking a little bit more about Maat and the scales. Another figure associated with the grimoire and the idea of these magical books is King Solomon. The Testament of Solomon was said to contain specific instructions on summoning and binding demons. Let me tell you, demonology is a humongous topic, and it's so much more than you or I think it is at all. I sat through an hour-long lecture that was about ancient grimoires, these ones specifically dealing with demons and daemons and angels, and that hour-long lecture barely scratched the surface. So, humongous topic. So I don't want you to hear the word demons and demonology and instantly think this was some sort of weird fake satanic hoax or anything like that. So the book details this story of Solomon where he was building the temple, and he kept having this very pesky problem of demons. Demons were just all up in there. And because he was kind of a practitioner of magic, they were bothering him and they were trying to get to him, because that's what demons do, right? They tempt you. Because Solomon was skilled in magic, he was able to come in contact with the archangel Michael, who gave him a ring featuring the seal of Solomon, which you can still find on talismans and things, which is said to trap and bind demons and to theoretically keep them from doing harm. So Solomon kept all these nasty little dudes in jars, and unfortunately, eventually their energy got to him. and he was tempted into worshiping false gods like the demons Moloch and Baal, which are other demons you might have heard about in other supernatural fiction. The book he wrote was meant as a warning about the nature of demons, how to deal with them, and then how to be cured of demonic possession later. Not all of them were. Some really were just about summoning demons. Some were real and some were put out just because books like this became very popular. You know, there was all these anonymous writers of grimoires, and when we go back, we can trace them back to just writers, just writers or philosophers or religious teachers who were just going about their business and wanted to release the information about their magic without any sort of notoriety. How neat is that? Most of the time, someone was there willing to take the credit, though. So when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, grimoires and all books of magic were burned, destroyed, and seized as blasphemous, right? Though they continued to be published and circulated, I might add. You know, it was back in the beautiful days when you could just publish and circulate books and no one would ever find out. Wonderful. So even within Abrahamic religions like Judaism and Islam, there was an unbreakable connection between religion, any religion, and magic. And the magic was similar but different all across the board, just like the religions themselves. So people have been consistently interested in books of magic and the occult, and many famous visionary thinkers throughout history were said to have written and circulated their own magical manuscripts, like the poet Virgil and Aristotle. Agrippa, you know, he wrote about astrology, and astrology now is considered a magical art, where at the time it was science. It was astronomy, as we've discussed in previous episodes. So late in the 15th century, books kind of turned on magical practitioners. They turned against us, our beloved books. And books like Daemonology, which was penned by King James of Scotland, literally, and the Malleus Maleficarum were both used as manuals for hunting down, questioning, and condemning supposed witches to die. A popular witchfinder general at the time was so influenced by King James's Daemonology that he was personally responsible for the execution of 300 witches in a matter of 2 years. Horrifying. Last year in October, I posted about witchcraft documentaries, and in one of them there is a big section on this witchfinder general, Matthew Hopkins. And I believe it was Witches, A Century of Murder. I'll put the link to the blog post so that you guys can find it on your own later if you want to learn a little bit more. So Matthew Hopkins, this witchfinder general, proclaimed himself witchfinder general, by the way. He saw it as a career opportunity because witch hunts were the new craze that was sweeping all of Europe, right? And near the end of his tenure as a witchfinder general, after those 2 years and right before he died, he wrote The Discovery of Witches. Yes, that's where that new one by Deborah Harkness got its name. And in 1647, it was considered required reading throughout the witch trials that lasted in Europe and even made it across the ocean, where its methods led to the deaths of the innocents in Salem and all across New England. So those 300 witches that Matthew Hopkins was responsible for killing, thanks to these incredibly interesting but scary books, was only the tip of the iceberg. Thanks a lot, books. That's what I mean. They kind of turned on us a little bit. Now, if you want to read some of these older texts, the Malleus Maleficarum, Daemonology, even the Discovery of Witches, you can find all of these online in free PDF form. A lot of museums that host books like this will have them available. They're hard to read because of the language. You know, Old English is kind of difficult unless you study Shakespeare for a living. But it was very interesting to see what exactly qualified somebody as a witch. As we've talked about before, most of the witches were just people that didn't fit in at all, or they had a strange mark on their body, or they were disabled in some way, or they were just a woman going about her business. So it's interesting, but scary. Luckily, Once we got knee-deep into the Age of Enlightenment, books became our friends again. And grimoires continued to be written, published, and circulated widely. Books of magic allegedly written by religious figures like Solomon and Moses got really super popular in the 18th and 19th century and were adopted as the official interest of Masonic orders, like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and the Ordo Templi Orientis, of which Aleister Crowley was their most notable member. Y'all, he just ate that shit up. He loved it. Loved it. And actually, the Seal of Solomon and the magical arts of Moses are still pretty prominent in modern magical traditions. Hoodoo, for example, talks about Moses a lot. Moses is a prominent figure in a lot of their stories and mythologies. And the Seal of Solomon can be found on talismans and books and anything that you can find at witchy shops. You can still find a ring with a nice big Seal of Solomon on it for protection. So this brings us up to the 20th century, and it's time to talk about Gerald Gardner and his Book of Shadows. Like much of the history of Wicca, the actual origin of the idea and the name is, at best, sketchy as hell. Gardner always claimed that he learned everything from real witches, real hidden covens throughout England. But some of his most trusted coven mates, like Doreen Valiente, who is the mother of modern witchcraft, super big fan, have said over and over since then that he made it up. He found the name in the back of what was essentially like a comic book or a Penny Dreadful type situation and thought that it sounded rad. It sounded secretive, and it sent the message that he wanted, that this was a book that contained the unseen arts. In the words of the new Sabrina, it contained these things that exist only in the dark and in the night. He also loved the Masonic style magic of Crowley and all of those Masonic orders. Lots of men loved that. Lots of men still love that because it was very much something where they could just be themselves with other men doing their weird man shit. And it's still incredibly popular. Just like witchcraft, right? Just like covens. So he incorporated a lot of this Masonic and Aleister Crowley stuff into the earliest copies of his books and his real Book of Shadows that he was using with the coven. And this eventually came to the attention of Doreen, who was incredibly well read. Honestly, she was the heart and soul. So she confronted Jerry about the outright plagiarism of Crowley's works, along with the Key of Solomon and the Aradia, the Gospel of the Witches by Leland there. She thought Crowley was too icky and too sexual of an influence, and let's be real, she was probably right, and that would distract from the seriousness that they were trying to come across. They were trying to show people that Wicca and witchcraft was a real and serious religion and spiritual path, and she believed that having Crowley's influence in there would tarnish that. And she took on the task of rewriting the vast majority of the Coven's Book of Shadows, as well as some of Gerald's future works. She was a really gifted writer and a poet. She wrote swaths of the Charge of the Goddess, the Wiccan Rede, all sorts of things that you can still find in the commercially available copies of Gerald Gardner's Book of Shadows. You can find really, really beautiful copies of these that are, hardcover and special editions at most metaphysical shops. If not, they can get you any sort of paper copy. Anything by Gerald Gardner is, as long as it's not some sort of original, is fairly easy to find, and I highly recommend looking at it. If you are interested in Wicca at all, it's interesting where it came from and how much it's changed. I've always thought that it was very interesting that this spirituality that has always been very, very woman-focused was not invented by, but let's say kick-started by this man. And lots of different men, he wasn't the only man there. Very, very interesting. Some of Gerald's original's Book of Shadows, or at least chunks of it, some of the notes are still commercially available, of course, but some are still followed by traditional Wiccan covens in Gardnerian and Alexandrian traditions. They still have chunks of his original books. There are notes out there. There are original copies, draft copies. If you are someone who really wants to own a fabulous historical piece of, Wiccan writing, you can find it out there. Some of the other covens and witchy traditions that sprung up after Wicca have different names. But the function of this book is all the same. It's to document the magic undertaken by the coven or created by the coven. As I mentioned a little earlier, how a Book of Shadows was made and used has changed a lot over time. But there has always been a more personal, journal-like element to it than these classical grimoires, which were really just a textbook for magic. Book of Shadows often contained personal information about the people using it and were not really created for wide publication at first. These days, a Book of Shadows is not a specifically Wiccan concept anymore. Many secular witches still use the idea and the name, and they create their book out of everything: paper, notebooks, bullet journals, 3-ring binders, Pinterest boards. I still have like a CD-ROM somewhere that is a commercially put out Book of Shadows CD-ROM. I keep it because it's so weird. I look at it and I'm like, I definitely ordered this from the internet and sent a money order to be able to afford it. Oh, it makes me laugh. But of course, you can also get really incredible reproductions of magic books from movies and shows and stuff like Practical Magic. You can get that gigantic book that flips over and opens the other way. And a repros of the Charmed Book of Shadows that has the triquetra symbol on the front in, hardcovers with amazing parchment pages that have been handmade. You can find these all over Etsy. You're going to pay a couple $100, but they are really special. At a lot of metaphysical stores, they do have these really cool leather-bound journals that you can buy that have this really nice, soft, pulpy paper inside and usually have a tree of life or crystals or something on the front. These are great. But there's no right or wrong way to make your book. It doesn't have to look as witchy as you maybe want it to be. It doesn't have to be made out of human skin with a real live eyeball on the front. There's no wrong way to make it, and there's no right or wrong thing to put in the book. There's no name you have to use for it specifically either. You can call it a grimoire, a book of shadows, a spell book, or just a journal or a diary. You can give it a human name. You can walk around with your magic book named Carl or Susanna or whatever. Much like your witch practice, it's totally individual. Though if you have a magic book named something like Carl or Susanna or Pete, I'd love to hear about it. If you look online at instructions or ideas of what to put in your Book of Shadows, or even, again, on Etsy, you can find pages that other people have created that you can buy and put into your book. But you can see that it's sort of a reference guide. It talks about the herbs and crystals that they use and what they mean, deities they might connect with or want to connect with, tarot meanings and readings, candle color references, the daily correspondences, etc., etc. Those who like to use the tarot deck for either self-exploration or divination often will keep a specific tarot journal, and that's filled with spreads they create, lists of decks that they have and use, thoughts on the artwork in their specific decks, maybe doodlings of cards so that they can remember some of the symbolism, and then, the results of their readings that they do, all dated so that you can go back later and see if those things have happened or if you've learned that lesson. This is also something that you can include in your Book of Shadows. My personal journal, and it's a notebook from a dollar store. It's a lined page notebook. It's a spiral. That's what I love. As long as it's got a hardcover that I can flip all the way open so I can put it on my knee and write it in anywhere. I have 100 of these. I fill up about one a year, and by fill up, I mean, yikes. There's lots of empty pages in there. But I fill up about one a year with a lot of different tarot readings and all of my thoughts that come up from the tarot readings and any sort of spells or rituals that pop into my head at random. Anything kind of magical that just seems to appear. Those who are artists or artsy can use collage. I totally do. I love that. They could choose a book, in which they can paint or draw with nice thick pages. You can totally use a sketchbook as a book of shadows. I've seen it a million times. Sketchbooks have really nice thick paper, right? And these like visual books of shadows, these collages and paintings and stuff, they're so, so cool. And they have so much energy of their own. They're a piece of art and a piece of magic all by themselves before you even open it up and read anything. If you've joined a coven, they may have traditional prayers or invocations that go into everyone's book. They may also have a communal book in addition to everyone having their individual private copies. A few witches I've spoken to say they have a group book of shadows that's hosted or kept online in something like Dropbox or Google Drive or Basecamp. And I think that's brilliant. That's brilliant because anyone can add anything from wherever they are right in the moment that it comes up. In that way, you can have a coven of people all over the world that can share things constantly. The same is true with, Facebook groups. Back in my day, it was literally Yahoo groups. And I think of it now and it always makes me laugh because I don't even think that's a thing. But Yahoo groups were where you could find pagan groups in this area back then. And they were a treasure trove of different document files and GeoCities website links, but lots of information about people's personal practices and magic and spells that I kind of wish I could go back and find now. A lot of these books, whether they're from a group or an individual, also include things like detailed descriptions for what you're going to do on Sabbath celebrations or full moon workings, how you put together an altar, a little bit about how those Sabbaths or those holidays made you feel, how they affect your witchcraft, things like that. If you love the idea of keeping a physical book that you write in with your hand, but are into a more modern aesthetic, fear not. Tons of witches are turning to bullet journaling for a new way to efficiently and easily keep all their notes, while they can still express their creativity in the way that they choose. I'll put some links in the description, but honestly, if you search for bullet journal or Bujo, I like to say Bujo because it reminds me of bougie, Bujo book of shadows, you'll find tons of awesome guides, especially on Pinterest, of course. So bullet journaling is a system that was created by Ryder Carroll, who struggled with learning disabilities early in life and had to find innovative ways to be productive and organized that worked for him and that he could consistently keep up. So bullet journals consist of short sentences, and they're marked with symbols and signs to provide context for those sentences. So you have little dots and dashes that represent tasks or events or thoughts or notes. And that gives context to that single sentence. So this is an event, and it could just say full moon. You have a full moon event to go to, 8 p.m. Wonderful. In witchy versions, people have started creating or using symbols for tarot cards, planets, and astrological periods to mark different parts on calendars. They draw witchy tools to indicate the things that you'll need, and moon phases. I also saw one that had a symbol to indicate if something was written or something that was written in the book was channeled during meditation. Like it was a little thing that looked a little bit like a ghost, actually. like a little bit like a, I don't know. I think it probably was a ghost, but it looked a little like a ghost. And the writing next to it was like different. You could tell it was a little bit different, as it often is during channeling. And unfortunately, I wish I could find that again, but I have been trying and I lost it. That might have been a Tumblr post, y'all. Anyways, super, super interesting, right? This style allows you to keep it simple if that's what you want. It's easy to read. It's easy to navigate. There's an index and a symbol key, and you can find everything on page numbers. And you can get creative and add drawings or doodles or colors or collage if that's what you want. But you also don't have to, right? The possibilities with this modern idea of journaling, the possibilities are just as endless when it comes to your magical book. So as is implied by the name that Gerald Gardner found in the back of a comic book, I think it was actually like an occult magazine. Stuff like that was very popular in the 40s and the 50s the 60s and 70s, right? There was these really cool occult magazines that were being put out. I think of them a lot like a combination of comic books and a penny dreadful. So you have all the really great ads in the back. Fantastic. So as is implied by this name, your book is usually thought to be very personal and very secret. It's your personal record of your spirituality with full spell details and possibly very private thoughts or messages from deities that are just for you. I know when I look through one of my old ones from my youth, which I've mentioned a few times, it's a little embarrassing because it shows me the kinds of things that were so important to me at the time that I did or intended to use, because there's lots of spells in there I never cast and I know it. I intended to use this magic to deal with these problems. And many had to do with, becoming thin or beautiful or fitting in or, being perfect. Sad, but I was also like a preteen. But as you can see, sometimes they can end up being very personal, even if you don't write anything very personal in them. Again, this is totally up to you. If you want to have a fully public book of shadows that's sitting on your coffee table or that's hosted online, that's what you should do. Either way, this is just something to think about before you start your book. Maybe you want to have your own private journal, but you want to keep all of your spells and recipes in, a binder that's easy to find and easy to share. It's up to you. Again, possibilities are endless. You can also find things that lock up if you want it to be super secret. You can find these leather-bound ornate things, or even something subdued that could be hidden in plain sight. The bullet journals are usually in just very nice black, regular, the moleskin style notebooks, stuff like that. I like to take time when I start a new book for this purpose to write a little something in the beginning of the book that explains my intentions. I want to tell the book about all of the fabulous things that we can accomplish together. I like mine to be a little bit private, so I'll also include a small little prayer, or even like a sigil or symbol for protection. This is something I do during a ritual to bless or to consecrate my new book, which I'm really excited because I'm going to share it with you guys. I'll put the full ritual instructions in PDF format on my website and in the description for you to download, and you guys can use it as much as you want. I think it's a nice little ritual. It's one that I created a few years ago, but I still use it. I recently used it on a different book. So for this ritual, you're going to want to gather a white candle. It can be whatever size you like. Incense that either makes you feel very spiritual, something like sandalwood, or something that speaks to dedication or your own practice specifically. Then you want some blessed or some holy water. I personally like full moon water. And what a coincidence. It's a full moon tomorrow. It's almost like I planned that. So you also want something to represent the earth element, so soil or sand or salt, just a little bit in a bowl. And matches are a lighter, a pen, and anything that you like to use to create sacred space or to get yourself into the right place for magic. So that could be your entire altar, your athame, your chalice, your everything, or it could just be that you want to get somewhere comfortable and ground yourself and be comfortable. Either way is fine. So light your candle and your incense and get that all going. Get yourself this nice witchy vibe. And when you're ready, place your book in front of you. You're going to use those elemental items to bless the book and to imbue it with magic for all of your future spiritual endeavors. I place before you my book of shadows and ask the elements of the earth to bless this spiritual journey. Sprinkle a little bit of your earth onto your book. I bless this book with the element of earth and its stable, grounding energy. Carefully sprinkle a little bit of your water onto the book or in the air above it if you have to. I bless this book with the element of water and its ever-changing emotional energy. Very carefully pass your book through or over the flame of your candle without setting yourself or the book on fire. That would be a bad omen. Sorry. I bless this book with the element of fire and its transformative and passionate energy. Pass the book through the smoke rising from your incense. I bless this book with the element of air and its wise and purifying energy. So at this time, hold your book, take it up, and take some time to connect with it. That could just mean holding it. That could be meditating on it for a while. If you're interested in writing a dedication page or a statement of intent at the beginning there, this is a perfect time. Perfect time. And you could take a few minutes to do this or a few hours. It's totally up to you. And when you're ready, when you feel like your book is all primed and ready to be filled with your magic, finish the blessing ritual with this following invocation. With the aid of the elements of earth, flame, sea, and sky, I consecrate and bless this book of shadows or grimoire, that it may protect my personal records, be my personal reference, and exude my spiritual devotion. Thank you. Amen. So mote it be, blessed be, what have you. And that's it. It's a very simple ritual that can be totally personalized for whatever kind of book that you're using. You can do this with a tablet or a laptop. Of course, just don't soak it in water and still don't set it on fire or get the soot on it. Be careful with that. But basically what this is a ritual to bring all of the elements together, as well as the element of spirit through your own devotion, and attach all of that to your book. So you can close everything down, close your circle and your ritual, put out your candle, and be done for a little while. Or you can continue working on your book under the light of a super spooky Friday the 13th full moon, which I think is much more fun. You can put out the candle and you can relight it anytime you sit down to work on your book to remind both of you of that connection that you've created. Okay, so that is a little bit about the history of grimoires and magical books and how to start your own book of shadows and a few things you can put in it. I'm going to take a little 1-minute break and do a little business, but when I return, we are talking about the commercially made witchy books, my favorites, my most used, my most nostalgic, and the ones that I'm so excited to read in the future. Over the last 3 years, I've shared a lot about my ongoing journey to better mental health. And I get messages all the time from listeners who are also struggling and looking for someone to talk to. Unfortunately, it can be very difficult to find therapy that is fully accessible, financially or otherwise. That's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp is an online service that can connect you with real licensed counselors who can be available on your schedule and right where you are. With 4 different ways to communicate in a wide range of specialties, there's a good chance you can find someone perfect for you, all without leaving home. Everything is confidential, and if you ever feel like your counselor isn't the right fit for you, you can switch right away. Not only is the service really affordable compared to in-person therapy, they also offer financial aid for those who need it. It's okay to need help. You deserve to get better, and you can start that journey at betterhelp.com/fatfeministwitch and save 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/fatfeministwitch. So I planned out this episode and thought it would be a breeze to talk about all my favorite witch books, right? It's my favorite topic, and really it is my favorite topic. I started making a list of all of my faves and the ones that I can't live without, and then I realized most of these have already appeared on the podcast or the website. I've reviewed half of them at least, and I've done entire episodes that revolve around some of my favorite books. So coming on here and rehashing all of that is just not super fun. So I tried to split them up into some categories, and I forced myself to only pick a few books from each category. Because here's the thing that I really realized is that I do not have a single favorite. Even in all these categories, no matter how many categories I split witchy books into, I can't pick one favorite from any single category. And A lot of my favorites are new. They came out in the time that I've been doing this podcast, right? Because there's so much fantastic stuff coming out right now. So I tried to split them up. Let's see how long this goes on. We're going to start with my 100% all-time favorites that I could read 100 times, and for some of them I damn near have. The first of these, which I have read 100 times, is Magical Housekeeping by Tess Whitehurst. When I started college in Vancouver, away from home, in 2011, my interest in witchcraft and magic was reignited while I lived there. Part of that was because I was kind of lonely, and I'd always been able to find community by searching for other pagans. And another part of that was because, oh my God, the natural environment of Vancouver is just like, if you can handle the lack of sun and the little bit of rain, the constant rain, it really is an absolutely incredible natural place. I think that just made me feel more magical. So I saw Magical Housekeeping in a Facebook post by the publisher of the book, Llewellyn, and I just loved the look of it. Wow, that looks cute. So I clicked through to the page on their website. And for the next few weeks, I regularly went back to the Llewellyn website just to look at this book. I looked at the cover, I looked at the whole cover. I looked at the contents list. I read any snippets that I could find online. And eventually I said, oh my God, fuck this. And I just bought it. And I actually, after I bought that, every semester when I got my student loan and I was buying my books for school, I always bought myself, because I was in tourism and travel, a couple of travel books. Just a couple to add to my, collection. And to use throughout the school year, of course. And so after that, I started adding a book or two from Llewellyn and just ordering them as well. Magical Housekeeping was the first one. It was the first time, this one, that I'd bought a magic book since high school. And like I said, after that, it was normal for me to buy and read magic books again. What I loved the most about it was that it was so different than a lot of the Wiccan-inspired books that I'd grown up reading. It was so different. And the author, Tess Whitehurst, was not someone I would normally imagine myself loving, because we're very different people, I can tell, right? But I've followed her, you could say, religiously ever since. She is very inspired by New Age concepts. She loves the ideas of angels. She works with plants, and all of her magic is very, very positive, which all seems like stuff I wouldn't love. But her books are, I don't know, they're just so relatable. And when I'm reading them, I feel like she's sitting right there. And I can't wait to hear all the things that she's telling me. And I feel so supported and so happy. She just gets me all amped up and excited about magic. All the time, every single one of the book. So this book, Magical Housekeeping, is basically a practical handbook for cleansing and clearing your home's energy and creating a happier and more harmonious environment. And the place I lived in was not happy or harmonious. So when the book came in, I read it cover to cover that day. I could not put it down. And I read it cover to cover the next day as well, let me tell you. And that first night, I started trying things out. I've tried probably half the rituals in the book, some multiple times over the years now, and I use this book all the time. Just, what was it, last week or the week before? I was looking up the energy of certain plants for that episode on workplace witchery, because she mentions it, setting up your home office. She talks about feng shui, because she was a feng shui consultant back in the day when that was a thing in Los Angeles, more so than it is now. She also talked about animal allies, incenses, plants. I couldn't get enough. I loved it because it was so simple, but it's full of information. It's really positive and really upbeat, and it just felt so inclusive of any type of witch or person. It was the first time I also saw a witch who followed not one single rule, except one that she decided was important for herself. She's so independent. And I still love that about her and all of her books. Like literally all of them. I have them all. Except for The Magic of Trees, which I need to get. It's the only one I'm missing so far. But her books are just, they have a great energy that is very inspirational. The next is Coventry Magic, which I have reviewed on the blog and mentioned on the show so many times now, and I even featured it in an episode of Seeker's Corner, because this book I use it constantly for a lot of different things. This book's written by Jackie Smith, the owner and creator of Coventry Creations Candles in nearby Ferndale, Michigan. Ferndale, Michigan, by the way, is one of the cutest, coolest towns I've ever seen in my life, or cities. It's just really, really awesome place, and their store there has such a cool vibe. I love Ferndale. Just in case anyone in Ferndale is listening, I love you, and I think your city is great. So this book was one of the first I read when I got my first job at a witchy shop. And I was instantly addicted. Like within the first couple of pages, I was so enthralled. This book is about so much more than candles. It's not just about candles. Oh my God. It's about everything. It's about life, magic, fear, conquering that fear, family and sisterhood, independence, and fire. Just a lot of fire. Jackie's practice is also heavily inspired by hoodoo traditions. And this was my first look at some of the methods and the stories and the herbs that are popular in hoodoo magic. And since then, anything that incorporates hoodoo has kind of been my spiritual go-to. Any book that features conjure or hoodoo is like it's written in a language that my brain instantly understands. The herbs that they're using make sense. The method makes sense. Everything about it just makes sense to me. And the first time I found that was in this book, Coventry Magic. It wasn't overly British or Celtic. It wasn't incredibly traditional, but it wasn't super new for babies either. And like Tess Whitehurst, Jackie really made up her own rules and created her own independent practice and encouraged people to create their own independent practice as well. And I still very much respect that. My next favorite is kind of new. It's a little bit new. It's Light Magic for Dark Times by Lisa Marie Basile, which I've also talked about on the show quite a few times. The second I held this book, after taking it out of the mailbox, I got goosebumps on my whole body and a wave of simultaneous calm and excitement, if that's possible. I loved every single thing about Light Magic for Dark Times, which you can find all the reasons why right on my website. I gave it a 5 crystal ball review, and it earned it. I loved everything about the book, and the author, Lisa, has become someone whose work I will follow for as long as she is putting stuff out. Her voice through this book is compassionate and it's caring. She wasn't afraid to shy away from darkness and pain and that fear that we all kind of carry inside us. One amazing thing this book did for me that many others have failed to do was get me interested in and enjoying keeping a journal. As a kid, I loved writing. I wanted to grow up and write books, and I constantly wrote in diaries and I made up stories, and I had been doing it since, before my writing was legible. But somewhere along the way, I stopped. And I didn't even really realize how much I missed it. Just writing for fun, just for me, writing out my thoughts and everything, until I read Light Magic for Dark Times. Since then, I have filled 2 full journals, and whenever I need a spell to help with my emotional state or to do some work on myself, this is the first one that I grab off the bookcase. The next is The Enchanted Cat by Ellen Dugan. This book is so fun. I love Ellen Dugan's books about herb and plant magic. I think they're fantastic. Again, they're written in a way that is easy to follow, easy to understand, and is entertaining all the way through. She puts a lot of herself into these books. So when I saw this book, The Enchanted Cat, I knew that I had to have it. This book is all about cat magic, and that is absolutely not a joke. Not a joke. It's cat magic. It's about magical types of cats throughout history, lore and myths around magical cats, how to find and connect with one of your own, and spells and charms and poems and invocations to do with your cat, and cat astrology, and like how to bring your cat into working with magic. Like, it's just incredible. It's so much fun. And when I got it, I was looking through it and I found this really nice meditation kind of near the end of the book that was to help you say goodbye to a cat who's passed on, so that they know that you love them and so that their spirit makes it to, wherever it's got to go. And it used imagery of Bast, the Egyptian cat goddess, right? Which is beautiful. And it had been about 3 years since my cat Neil had passed away. But, oh my God, it was so raw. That hurt for a long time because it was sudden. And I felt a lot of guilt about it because he died because I fed him cheap food from the grocery store. It still kind of bums me out, but but a lot less than it used to, because I tried that ritual, and even though it had been a few years, I must have cried for about a solid hour. So embarrassing. But after that, this huge weight was lifted off my shoulders and off my heart. After that, I could start looking at pictures of Neil and thinking about him and reminiscing, and I could smile, and I even feel like, he pops in and visits sometimes. And so I'm super, super grateful to have had that experience because of that book. And I've never told anyone about this book and had them be like, that sounds stupid. Everyone's like, I need this. Cats and witches go together like cats and frickin' witches, man. Every witch should read a book about cat magic, and this one's my favorite. Ellen's other books, Garden Witchery and Herb Magic for Beginners specifically, could probably also go on this list, since I think they're some of the most interesting herbal magic books, especially for beginners, but even if you've loved plants for a really long time. I just really like the way she writes. So those are my favorites, and I use them all the time, but they're not necessarily the ones that I'm, using every single day. Those would be the Complete Crystal Handbook by Cassandra Eason, The Only Tarot Book You'll Ever Need by Skye Alexander, and Madame Pamita's Magical Tarot, and then an old classic, Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs. Most people's go-to when it comes to a crystal encyclopedia is the Crystal Bible by Judy Hall, or any version of the Crystal Bible by Judy Hall. And I love everything that Judy Hall puts out about crystals because she's fantastic and knowledgeable. But this Complete Crystal Handbook has things and correspondences and information in it that other books just don't. They just don't. And it's also, and I know you guys know how much I love this, arranged by color. So if I have a purple crystal and I have no idea what it is, I go to the purple section and look through big color photographs that show you great details of the crystals so you can identify, and then has a whole bunch of information. This book also doesn't just feature the most common basics. I would need all 3 crystal Bibles to track down every single one that's in this book, which means some things aren't in there. And there's not quite as much extended detail about each crystal. But instead, what I get is different ways that the herb or that the crystal could be used physically, emotionally, spiritually, in practical uses, magical uses, and even specifically in the workplace. It tells you what candles and scents or herbs match each stone, and an empowerment or affirmation, plus the zodiac sign and a divinatory meaning for every single one. That's so wild when I am trying to figure out what kind of crystal I want to use for a spiritual purpose, or if I'm trying to build a spell or ritual around a particular crystal. This book is instantly going to give me tons of information that I can use. I've also just felt over time that her specific correspondences for crystals more frequently match like the vibes that I'm getting more often than not. I look up a crystal online and let's say the zodiac sign just doesn't seem, I'm like, it doesn't seem to line up for me. That doesn't seem to line up. And I'll find that it's associated with 3 different zodiac signs, none of which seem right to me. And I'll look in this book and it happens constantly where the zodiac sign that's in there just instantly makes perfect sense. And it's the one that I had been thinking about. So Cassandra Eason and I obviously have a similar brainwave that we share or something. I use this book every single day, multiple times a day, and I'm constantly just carrying it from room to room, so I always have to track it down when I need it. It gets caught in my couch cushion because I'm constantly reading it there. I leave it in the bathroom because I'll look through it in the bath. Like, I adore it. So the only tarot book you'll ever need and the book by Madame Pamita are, quite obviously, the guides that I use while I read tarot for myself. Sky's book is unique in that it has, like, it's pagan. It's a pagan slant on all of that information, which is really helpful when you're using your cards and rituals or something. But if you are a witch and you've been a practicing witch for quite some time, sometimes you find tarot books and the information that's in there is not for someone who practices magic, which is okay. But sometimes you want a little bit of information how this card spiritually will affect you or will manifest throughout the day. It's a very modern book without ignoring the old. It tells you a little bit of history about each one. It gives you really cool facts about the characters on each card. It tells you about the numbers specifically, what they mean, what the different suits mean. And then it goes through, of course, all of them, gives you full upright and reversal interpretations. It's amazing. And it really is, like, it's small. Almost every time I see it, it's being sold for like $10. It's fantastic. Madame Pamita's tarot book is new, but oh man, is it really something. And I'm going to be talking about this. I think in October, we're doing an episode about tarot. This book is really, really neat. It's new, and I've been meaning to review it for a while, but I keep forgetting because I'm constantly using it. This book covers the design, the symbols, the artwork, and the historical meaning of each card in the OG Rider-Waite in its upright position. Even when using other decks, the list of symbols, it'll tell you different symbols, what they mean when they're all together. It gives you so much depth to the meaning of these cards and to why they mean the things that they do. I even found that when I'm using other decks that are not the Rider-Waite, but are inspired by it and use similar energy, most of the even specific things like yellow robe. There's a yellow robe in my Halloween tarot on the same card that there would be on the regular one. It shows you how connected so many of those tarot symbols are. I actually wish I had had it when I started with tarot because the explanations of some of those like really ancient symbols that I never really understood is just so groundbreakingly easy to understand. And Madame Pamita is great. She is great. She is another hoodoo practitioner that I absolutely adore. And I find all of her, her YouTube videos and her podcast and everything just so, it's like it's in a language that I instantly understand. Again, fantastic. So back in the day, despite other books that were going out there, when it came down to my favorites, Scott Cunningham was my favorite. He was my favorite, even though his books weren't super girly, which I really loved, right? He had this really friendly, very natural, down-to-earth, dad-like energy, like a cute dad with a little beard, and he was super, super knowledgeable. I will still recommend quite a few of his books to beginners, even, Scott Cunningham's Book of Shadows, and I'll just let them know that it's a little bit of an older book, but that it is full of really great information, and it's kind of basic information that so many pagan and witchy practices have been built on for decades now, right? The Encyclopedia of Magical Herbs is probably the only witch book for which I outright prefer the PDF. Like, I don't even have a physical copy of the book anymore. It got ruined, unfortunately. But I'm not sad about it because the PDF is great because I can search for something specific in 2 seconds. I love that. So in 2 seconds, I can type in mugwort. It brings me to the page on mugwort. I get a whole list of correspondences, all of its Latin names, some of its historical names, the uses, the deities associated, the zodiac, and sometimes even stories about each one, either from Scott Cunningham's personal life or practice, or from history that are really, really interesting. He usually told you which magical traditions the herbs were popular in, which was still to this day, I think is kind of wild. Not all herb books did that. Some books in Coventry Magic, she talks a lot about hoodoo. And I was looking through the herb section because there's a whole great section on herbs in that book. And there were some herbs whose names I did not recognize. And when I searched them in Scott Cunningham's book, they came up as some of the other names known by. And in those descriptions, it would say, this is a very popular plant used in the southern U.S. by African American magical practitioners. And that happened a lot of times throughout the book. So I still find it to be a really great jumping off point for information about almost any magical herb. He also had like vintage sketches of each one of the plants. So if you're looking at a plant in your hand, you can look in this book and kind of tell if you're looking at the right one. It's not like a full color like in my crystal handbook, but it still gave you an idea of what plant you should be looking at or holding in your hand. Wow, y'all, you wouldn't believe how many categories I had left. But this episode's getting a little bit long, and I want to make sure that I talk about this next category, which is upcoming books or recently released books that I'm incredibly excited to read. The first is The Astrology of Love and Sex by Annabelle Gatt, the astrologer for previously Broadly, now Vice Astrology. I read my horoscope from Annabelle Gatt every single day, and then the weekly one and the monthly one. Like, I read them all because she is fantastic. I also follow her on Twitter because she posts so much insight about astrology, and I love her perspective on astrology, and I love the accuracy. Love it. So The Astrology of Love and Sex, a Modern Compatibility Guide, came out at the very end of July. And oh my gosh, am I very excited. This book talks about compatibility in the zodiac in a way that's a little bit new. Because the way Annabelle talks about compatibility in the zodiac is a little bit new. She doesn't stick to the old, if you're an earth sign, stick with earth signs kind of stuff. She actually looks at each sign, their, all of their sexual inclinations, their philosophies, their personalities, and how to find people that you love out of every sun sign. I think that's fantastic. I'm really excited to read it. And after Sextrology, man, was that just the most interesting book on astrology that I had ever read. Another thing that's really, really great about this book is that Annabelle doesn't keep it into this rigid binary concept of gender and sexuality. She understands that gender roles, identity, sexuality are constantly evolving and changing. And so her book is not laid out like, here's how, a Virgo man and a Scorpio woman will interact, and that's it. It's not like that. She also doesn't tell you not to date or not to fall in love with any particular sign. She tells you how to fall in love with every sign, what's lovable about every single sign, including your own, and what other signs in your chart talk about your feelings and your experiences about love and sex. So I'm really, really excited for The Astrology of Love and Sex by Annabelle Gatt, and that one is already out. The next one is also by one of my faves there, Lisa Marie Basile. She's got a book coming out called The Magical Writing Grimoire. Use the word as your wand for magic, manifestation, and ritual. Oh boy, am I excited. Like I said, Lisa's previous book, Light Magic for Dark Times, really, really got me back into writing, not just for fun, but as an extension of my spiritual practice. It's something that I'm doing so much more that I'm actually working on a large writing project right now that will take me a few months, of course. I can't tell you exactly what it is yet, but I'm working on a large writing project that I'm super excited about, and I'm excited about the entire process. So I'm pumped to read the Magical Writing Grimoire and to find more ways to incorporate writing and journaling into my practice and into my, my everyday spiritual life. Lisa's a fantastic writer and poet, and so I'm really excited to see what her perspectives on writing are and her perspectives on writing for magic and witchcraft in a more extended way. I loved the bits about journaling and about writing in light magic, and I'm excited to see more of that. Now, the one I'm really excited about, and it's coming out in December of this year, it's called Finding Your Higher Self, Your Guide to Cannabis for Self-Care by Sophie St. Thomas. Sophie is another incredibly interesting witch that I follow on the internet. She is such a fantastic writer. Some of her writing was featured in Becoming Dangerous that I reviewed just a little while ago. She's the one whose story began with, "I chose the Frankencock," which is a sentence that will forever be burned into my brain. And she talks about sex, about witchcraft, about mental health, and just various uses of drugs and intoxicating substances all the time on the internet. So Finding Your Higher Self is a guide specifically for cannabis and self-care from a spiritual perspective. That comes out in December, and I'm like, counting down the days, friend. Counting down the days. I'm so excited to see more people writing about cannabis in this way where, it's not about the politics. It's not about what you think about drugs. It's not about any of that. It's about using something that's available to you that you are comfortable with to make your life better. And when women are writing about cannabis specifically, it brings up that knowledge that cannabis is an industry that is flourishing with very successful women. So I am excited to continue that line and support this very successful cannabis-loving woman with Cannabis for Self-Care, Finding Your Higher Self. I love the title, Finding Your Higher Self. It's so perfect, so perfectly clever. This last book is so new that I only just heard about it like last week. And it's not even here yet. It's in the mail on its way to me. And that is The Glam Witch by Michael Herkes. Oh, I'm excited for this book. The second I saw the ad, I was like, this is one I need to pay attention to. This book, The Glam Witch, is also called The Magical Manifesto for Empowerment with the Great Lilithian Arcane Mysteries. As such, it focuses on the goddess Lilith, who, again, I've mentioned so many times on here because I love that bitch. It uses the story and the energy of Lilith to help you create your own practice that is glamorous and outrageous, but doesn't shy away from the dark. Something healing for you, something that reaches way deep down inside and helps you bring out all of the stuff that you want people to see or that you want to get rid of. There are sections on, self-love, sex magic, and the power of orgasm, but also things like working with shadow magic, lotions and potions, and self-care sorcery. I am so incredibly excited about The Glam Witch, which is actually being released by Which Way Publishing from Which Way magazine, right? Very exciting. That is so cool. And I'm doing a giveaway. So they're sending me a copy. It's probably going to be here as the podcast is being released, right? Because I'm not recording this on the day it's coming out. It's probably going to be in my mailbox that day, of course. But Which Way Publishing has also agreed to help me do a little giveaway. So if you go onto my Instagram page, or if you look up the hashtags FatWitchFall and GlamWitch, you should be able to find the post there. You share the post, you put the story of Lilith in some emoji in the captions, and I will choose a winner tomorrow, Friday the 13th, around 1 o'clock, 13 o'clock, of course. So you can find out a little bit more about that on thefatfeministwitch.com, which will also link you to the Instagram and tell you a little bit about Lilith. But The Glam Witch is definitely a book to watch for, and you better believe that I will have a review soon since it is on its way. There you have it, witches. A whole episode just about witchy books. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that it was illuminating for you. If you guys start your own Book of Shadows or Grimoire and you want to show it off a little bit, you can absolutely do that. You can share it on my Facebook page or my blog or Instagram, whatever, and tag me in it because I would love to see it. I love seeing people's grimoires and books of shadows. Like I said, they're like a magical piece of art. And I just love that. If you want to find out more about my magical books, you can find the reviews for every book I have ever written or done on thefatfeministwitch.com, as well as information about any of the books that I mentioned today. If you want to support the podcast, you can do that by going to patreon.com/thefatfeministwitch and joining my monthly Witch and Bitch program for $10 a month. You can also go to my website and click Buy Me a Coffee to make, just coffee change donations. Of course, you don't have to support financially. Sharing the podcast, subscribing, all of that really, really helps. So thank you for everyone who's done that. Don't forget to head to my Instagram, instagram.com/fatfeministwitch, or just search Fat Feminist Witch, and enter my giveaway for a copy of The Glam Witch by Michael Herkes. I am so very excited about this book and about getting to give away a copy. Tune in tomorrow, Friday the 13th at 1 o'clock, aka 13 o'clock, to my social media channels to find out if you've won a copy and, to give me your address. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about magical books. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and a very cool and spooky full moon Friday the 13th. Stay magical, everybody.